I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're sailing across the great ocean and slaying beasts beyond our size, as I rank the bosses of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker from worst to best. I was really looking forward to this playthrough. After a host of smaller Zelda titles, getting to dive into a big adventure like Wind Waker had me chomping at the bit to get started. What I got was a title that has so much style, and a great handle on what it wants to be, but was marred by a rushed development cycle that left the game feeling a tad incomplete to me. I wanted a few more bosses than what we got, but we still have a fun showing to talk about. And for those curious, I am playing on the Wii U with the HD remaster, so if you're curious about why you can't see the map screen at any point in any of my footage, that is why. So be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future videos, and let's begin. Every Wind Waker boss ranked. Let me know your favorite down below. At number 9, we have Jalhalla, boss of the Earth Temple. Composed of a mask that is inhabited by a host of smaller Poes, this spirit killed the Earth Sage Laruto, and must be slain for Medley to take her place as the Sage of Earth. One thing you'll see throughout this list, I really enjoy all the bosses in this game for one reason or another. They have a lot of character and charm to them that allows each encounter to shine in different ways. Jalhalla just challenged me the least. You have to use the mirror shield to stun the boss, causing him to materialize and fall to the ground. Then lift him up and throw him into the spiked columns around the room, causing him to burst like a balloon. All the little Poes that make up his form begin to run around, and you have to rinse and repeat this process until you've killed every single Poe that makes up the boss. As time goes on, Jalhalla uses more attacks, such as a charged up flamethrower, but reflecting any light onto him cancels the attack animation. The only danger comes from some of the light beams being cut off midway through your attempts to stun the boss, but this just means you have to run to a different beam and continue your assault. Jalhalla gave me the least friction of the bosses, and for an almighty leader of the Poes, I wanted a little bit more from him that could actually hurt me, and that's what lands him at the bottom of the pack. At number 8, we have Kaledemos, the boss of the Forbidden Woods. A malicious plant who swallows Makar, who you've been sent to find. It's up to you to prune this weed and save the Korok from his own hubris. Kaledemos hangs from the ceiling, using vines to keep its weak spots safe. To access the vulnerable bulb, you need to use the boomerang to cut every vine from the ceiling, which will cause Kaledemos to then fall to the floor. The challenge here is in aiming the boomerang, while avoiding the many tendril attacks the boss can use. There are two tentacle types, those that stick to the flower, slamming down in various patterns to hit Link, and the tentacles that burrow beneath the ground, appearing to strike at Link as they get close to him. Those were the ones I struggled with in this playthrough, as I kept needing to whip the camera around while aiming the boomerang, leading to me getting smacked a bunch. I also paid for my hubris when the boss was weak by staying on the flower for too long, leading to me getting snacked on by the bulb and spat back out. It was a calculated risk for extra damage that ultimately paid off though. Kaledemos doesn't get any more aggressive as the fight goes on. It's the same pattern until it dies, which I find a tad boring in comparison to other fights in this game that escalate. But it's the first proper cool plant boss in 3D Zelda, so I really wanted to give it some props. You can also immediately kill it with a bottle of forest water, a nice Easter egg and likely a speedrunner's wet dream. I just think the other bosses left more of an impression. At number 7, we have Gohma, the boss of Dragon Roost Cavern. She's being a naughty girl, pulling on Valu's tail to irritate him, which in turn makes it so the Rito's god doesn't pay attention to his people. It's a rather silly premise, but this Gohma still ends up feeling like a huge threat. And that's not just because this is the largest Gohma in the series by a mile. You have to use your new grappling hook to pull the ceiling down onto the boss by hooking onto Valu's tail. The poor dragon has no clue what's going on down there, but the chaos is to your benefit. Each time the ceiling comes down, the boss's carapace shatters that bit more, eventually breaking into pieces after the third slam. Following this, the fight becomes a simple case of grappling Gohma's eye into position so you can strike her down with your sword, and the challenge of this fight is definitely the first half where you need to grapple the ceiling before getting slammed by one of Gohma's claws. It takes a moment to adjust to using the grappling hook in a battle scenario, but once you know where you're aiming, you can kill this queen extremely quickly. I'm not saying she's more complex than the two entries below her, I just think she makes a really good impression for a boss where you could potentially only have 3 hearts. And it's easily one of the most grand first bosses we've fought in the series thus far. Not enough to get her higher on the list, but first bosses in the 3D games always have a hill to climb in that sense. At number 6, we have Phantom Ganon, fought once in the Forsaken Fortress, and again in Ganon's Tower. While technically a mini-boss, I find his encounter memorable enough to include him on this list. It's the classic Ganondorf fight we've seen multiple times in the series up to this point. He'll levitate in midair, and in his first encounter, attack you with blue energy balls. Play tennis with the ghost and reflect the orbs back at him until he's struck down, upon which you wail on his body with your master sword. He can sometimes appear on ground level to strike you with his blade, which admittedly wasn't something I was expecting, but a simple dodge or shield will keep you from getting hurt. He's not a particularly hard fight at the Forsaken Fortress, and is arguably even more nerfed in Ganon's Tower, as despite having an extra magic attack that fires dark orbs at the player, and having extra clones when using his melee strike, he goes down in one hit. Every time you defeat him, he leaves his sword behind, it falls to the floor, and you have to go to the door in the direction his hilt is pointing in. Eventually, you'll find the light arrows while dealing with Phantom Ganon in each room as you go, but it gets a tad too repetitive for my tastes, even if it is an interesting gimmick. And finally getting to strike him down with a light arrow instantly vaporizes the ghost, allowing you the ability to progress in the tower. He doesn't threaten the player all that much, but has a really cool design and acts as a great mini-encounter within both dungeons he plays a part in. At number 5, we have Godan, the boss of the Tower of the Gods. Of all the fights in this game, I recalled that Godan was a well-beloved battle, and I was excited to see what he could offer. What I got was fine. In order to defeat the boss, you have to fire at his hands and his red eyes with arrows, which will cause him to drop his mouth open, allowing you to throw a bomb inside. Rinse and repeat until the fight is over. The hands can attack in a variety of different patterns that you'll have to be wary of, and the main danger I faced came from failing to use the lock-on effectively. I'd press the lock-on button, only to have the camera do a full 180 because it decided not to lock on to the hands for some reason, leaving me confused. His fireball attacks are actually quite dangerous and require you to do some precise running and rolling to avoid, and if you're knocked off the arena, you get zapped until you can climb back on. So it's a shame that the actual progression of the fight stays stagnant the whole time. I was expecting a new attack midway through to make me feel like I was winning, so when I actually beat the boss, I sat there thinking, there's no way that was it. Pacing is so important in a boss fight, and it's odd how in this game, there are some fights that really nail their pacing, and others that botch it completely. I also think Godan not being destroyed when you win the fight is an insane anticlimax. I just want to see a big rock creature explode, is that so much to ask? Guess I'll have to wait till Minish Cap. At number 4, we have the Helmarock King, the boss of the Forsaken Fortress. Of all the enemies Link encounters, the Helmarock King has the most personal connection to our hero, being the trigger for the events of the story when he swipes Link's sister Aryll from Outset Island. Then, attempting to rescue her, we're flung into the ocean by the beast and forced to bide our time until we obtain the Master Sword and return to the fortress. The boss has 2 phases. The first has Link racing up a flooded room while the water attempts to catch up with him, and the Helmarock King tries to peck and claw at you as you go. I remember the sequence being a bit more involved as a kid, whereas now I'm seeing it's just a run anti-clockwise simulator with a few enemies that appear who you can just run past without consequence. It's a fun set piece, but that is all it is. The actual boss fight takes place on the roof of the fortress, where the Helmarok King will take to the skies. His basic combo is landing on the roof near Link before attempting to peck at him with his beak. If his attack misses, you can use your hammer to slam the bird's head with a smack, cracking his mask. And this is your goal: break the mask and then go to town on that chickeny flesh with your fancy new Master Sword. Sometimes the king can whip up gusts of wind to blow you into the spikes surrounding the arena, very evil eagle, but if you see it coming, it's not a danger. Lastly, when its mask breaks, it begins making charge attacks where it will scrape its feet across the floor in an attempt to ram into you, and you just have to repeat your strategy to give you the victory. It's a fight that grows a lot as it goes on, and has a lot of narrative significance, but my only pet peeve is that the boss spends so much time in the air that he's often nowhere near the arena for most of the fight. It leads to a lot of waiting, which is fine, but not my cup of tea. I wish he had a projectile he could fire from afar. A really great start to the second half of the game, and a satisfying revenge match. At number 3, we have Ganondorf, fought atop Ganon's tower as the game's final boss. I said it on my Blue Sky account, but I truly find Wind Waker's incarnation of our favourite villain to be the most relatable he's ever been. This is a man who truly saw the devastation of the Gerudo and the salvation Hyrule offered. He's a man stuck in the past, unable to push forwards, and yet he still shows moments of mercy, not killing Link or Zelda when collecting their Triforce pieces being a prime moment. But then the King of Hyrule just had to Giga Chad his way to the Triforce first and cause our angry grandpa to snap. And I firmly believe this is the most terrifying that Ganondorf has ever been in these games. The facial expressions, the silhouettes they play around with due to the cartoon nature of everything, his downright haunting laugh. It all leads to one of the most intense final boss fights in the series from a narrative perspective, with the water pouring down, flooding Hyrule as you avoid the onslaught of a man powered by spite with nothing to lose. Gameplay-wise, you have to counter and parry Ganondorf's sword combos, while Zelda attempts to fire at him with the light arrows. He's the only boss that justified me collecting every heart piece the game had to offer because of his damage output, but that's only because I was playing recklessly to see what would happen. He begins to dodge the arrows, ultimately bitch-slapping Zelda into unconsciousness, and honestly, I wish he'd bitch-slap me into unconsciousness. That's daddy right there! I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Then he unleashes his Ultra Instinct sword combos, and you have to parry the King of Evil while damaging him until Zelda awakens, leading to Zelda's plan to fire a light arrow at Link's mirror shield, which he reflects into Ganon, prompting a parry that ends the fight in spectacular fashion. Between the Tears of the Kingdom nuke and plunging a sword into Ganondorf's head in the Wind Waker, I'm not sure which ending I prefer, but I really like that Ganondorf has a happy ending as he feels the wind for the final time. But why he lands at number 3 on this list is because I actually felt this final fight was a tad short. I was expecting another phase, or a slight evolution to Ganondorf's moveset, and then suddenly it was over. A really great final battle with what might be my favourite incarnation of the villain, but I was just left wanting a little bit when all was said and done. At number 2, we have Puppet Ganon, fought in Zelda's bedchamber in Ganon's tower. In a way, I guess you could call this the true first phase against Ganondorf, a battle against his deranged puppet form as he attempts to snuff you out there and now. Ganon leering over the bedside of Princess Zelda as Link approaches is imagery I won't soon forget, and following that up with the way his body contorts and breaks apart while forming his puppet is a visual style of horror you wouldn't expect from Wind Waker. This is the longest fight in the game, split into 3 distinct forms you have to defeat. The first is Ganon's pig form, a representation of his original incarnation, and the form with the most complexity. He'll attempt to slam you with his large orbed hands, while you attempt to cut the strings holding him up with your boomerang. The goal of each phase is to strike the glowing blue orb with a light arrow, as the only way to damage the boss is to do this, meaning positioning is vital. Side note, I really love the string sounds that play when you pluck each of them with your boomerang. It actually complements the music rather well. I wasn't sure what to do in this first phase, taking me a while to figure out that I needed to shoot the tail, which meant I spent a few minutes getting smacked by Ganon while fighting swarms of geese. I just assumed you had to cut every string and then something would happen. Once I figured it out though, the first phase was a piece of cake. The second form, a giant 6-legged spider, was surprisingly good at triggering my arachnophobia. He leaps onto the ceiling and attempts to smash you, with you needing to position yourself correctly to strike the blue orb. The trick is that you need to look down at the arena's watery floor to spot Ganon's reflection, thus knowing where to move to. It is a really cool feature, and is the most memorable part of this fight to be sure. The last round takes a turn for the chaotic as he turns into a Moldorm, speeding around the room in erratic movements you have to predict. I actually found this to be super easy myself, though I could see why people struggle with recognizing its movement pattern. Puppet Ganon is a marathon, not a sprint, and while I was never in danger of dying at any point, I felt the fatigue of a long boss fight wearing me down. Taking the puppet and cutting his strings for the last time brought me a real feeling of relief. It's just a really solid fight with 3 very distinct phases, and I really respect the challenge. But I might be a little biased, you all know who's left. At number 1, we have Mulgara, the boss of the Wind Temple. Sent to the dungeon to slay the previous Sage of Wind, Fardo, we have to bring Makar to this place so he can become the new Sage of Wind and return power to the Master Sword. Mulgara is a special fight, fought in a sand-drenched chamber, where you have to slay the massive beast and her children in order to win. She begins the fight by diving beneath the sands and emerging with her maw in the center of the arena. You have to hookshot her little tendril so you can slice it to deal damage, and I'll be blunt, this isn't a hard fight to win, but it's the surrounding elements of the fight I really enjoy. She's the only boss who actively summons help in the form of her children to battle with her, which you defeat in the same way by hookshotting their faces to pull them from the sand. Learning to manage her versus her minions is a fun balancing act, made more so when she bursts into the air and attempts to chomp down on you and crashing back into the arena. I also love the way the sand shifts depending on Mulgara's position. A lesser boss would have Mulgara in the center of the arena at all times, but here, depending on the boss's placement, the sand actually has physics and shifts upwards and downwards to compensate. It's just a small level of technical detail I really enjoy. And I can't talk about Mulgara's fight without bringing up that music, which is widely considered to be one of the best boss music tracks in the franchise. There isn't a single remaster or remix of Mulgara's battle theme that isn't a banger, and it all started with a guy going chicka 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 chicka. The scope of the boss also feels so much cooler than that of a Jalhalla or a Kale Demos or a Goma. Mulgara is colossal in size, to the point where defeating her feels like overcoming a massive hurdle. What I love about The Wind Waker is how any of my top 5 bosses on this list could be number 1 for any given person, and that's the sign of some well-designed encounters. It's making me very excited for the upcoming 3D Zeldas, as Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword do have some real standouts to come. Mulgara was so popular that it got referenced in Tears of the Kingdom with the Colgera boss, though it does exacerbate the fact they got the 2 sages mixed up in Wind Waker. Medley 100% should have gone to the Wind Temple since she flies, while Makar should have gone to the Earth Temple because he grows things, as Colgera in Tears of the Kingdom appeared on the Rito questline, despite Mulgara being a Korok questline. Rant over, at least until next week's dungeon video. And that's my list. Which Legend of Zelda Wind Waker boss is your favorite? Let me know down below. And be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. Who knows, maybe you'll get the Triforce. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing. It is $4.99. It gets you early access to future videos, and a shout out in the description and at the end of videos as well. If you want to follow me on my Blue Sky. That is where I'm active at the moment. It is lovely over there. It's so good. And I'll see you next time for another video. Adios.